Hi everybody, Richard Roy 2 here. If you're getting tired of seeing my face, blame Kwanzaa. He's taunting me with interesting questions. Just slightly, I'll leave a link in the sidebar to the video where he's asking the taunting question about suicide. I have to say, yeah, it's a taunting question because it rests on the borderline of life and death. From there, you've either discovered the meaning of life, or which is why it's such an interesting place to explore, because it is the foundation or the frontier. Now, either you found the meaning or not, and if not, then you're either letting somebody else define life for you, or you've decided to choose death. Just from that, there's so many openings I find that carry on that can be explored even further. So it's not a simple thing. It's something, even though it's a single word, it floats on that precipice, that borderline between life and death, and it has you asking the most important question: is life worth living, or is it not? Now, I'm going to explore this in a limited respect, and that is, I'm going to, for this time, limit it to those issues that Kwanzaa addresses in his video. As I say, link in the sidebar. There was a point early on that he says that he has power over his own life and therefore over his own death, or control over his own life and therefore control over his own death. And I don't think, because I think I regard him as pretty intelligent, so I don't think he really implied that man is immortal, that he has such broad powers. We do have limited control over our lives. After all, we had no choice about being born. We have no choice about the fact that we got to die. So, and there are certain elements of our lives that are not within our control, such things as accidents, natural disasters, disease, the fact that our lives are limited. We do have to die. We're going to age. We do have choices in certain elements that have to do, that pertain to the quality of our lives, whether we take into consideration the factors that involve the nature of life, that life has certain requirements, and in order to live a proper life to the best of our ability, we have to fulfill those requirements. So eating properly, sleeping enough, getting exercise, all these other things that would help to reduce the possibility of making us susceptible to such things as disease, or perhaps being unable to ward off attacks of various kinds. Exercising our mental capacity in order to be able to acquire the skills that make it possible for us to develop our lives and make it better able to provide the needs for life. Control, yeah, to some degree. It's like you can get mugged, and that's not something entirely in your control, but there are elements to it that you can control, such as keeping yourself from being in a position where you're more likely to get mugged. Things like that. From there, Kwanzaa goes on to ask about the price of suicide, or could it be referred to as the costs of suicide. And when I think of costs or price, I think about the need for the expenditure of effort or energy. So, which would take more, which would cost more, living or dying? From the perspective of the person who's in a position to commit suicide, the actual act of committing suicide would cost very little in terms of effort and energy compared to what it takes to live. From the perspective of one's legacy, that is, what effect your life and death have on others around you, your legacy could either be tarnished by your suicide, or it could be uplifted by your suicide. For instance, if your suicide relieved the suffering of others, then others may regard you quite highly. Or if your suicide was something that was necessary in order to further other people's lives, well, you know, this is a very difficult issue, and a lot of people may put a person's intention to commit suicide down to the simple matter of cowardice, afraid to face life. But not everybody who decides to go towards death is necessarily running away from life. Maybe they're just turning it off. They say, that's enough, I've had enough, I don't want to do this anymore. We all have different thresholds of pain. We're all somewhat wired differently as to what our pleasures might be as well. So for us to simply take our own perspective and say that it must apply to everybody else, no matter what, in all degrees, I find it difficult to do something like that. I really do. Because, well, for the different threshold of pain, what one person can stand, another person may not. Be very careful about applying that to other people and saying that, oh, that person couldn't take as much as I could. Because chances are there's probably someone out there who can take more than you can. And they'll be just as apt to be able to call you a coward as you are to call somebody lesser a coward. Cowardice is a kind of a funny term, because you're talking about cowardice and courage, and they're actually something I consider to be somewhat relative as well. But one person to be able to withstand this much, and this person to be able to withstand this much, to that person, this person may be a coward. And then to be another person up here, and this person would be regarded as courageous compared to this person. So, you know, this relative aspect of things is something you might want to consider as well. Now, there is one other thing that I want to deal with here that wasn't necessarily on Kwanzaa's list, but it seems to have come up in the comments and is sometimes implied, and that is the idea that selfishness is involved with the decision to commit suicide. And from that, I'm going to have to say, yes, suicide is selfish. Well, what do you call it when a person pursues their self-interest in living, except selfish? You get caught in a trap. You have to, in order to be able to say that I'm not going to consider the self, say that your decision not to consider the self has validity, which gives credibility to the self. So you can't deny the self in any aspect of your existence, in any aspect of your life. You have to give it the credibility to make the decisions. There's no choice about it. The term selfishness is merely a way of trying to make people feel guilty for something that's actually in their own nature that they can't avoid, and is basically a means of perpetuating guilt, so they defer to others. That's the only thing I can see its purposes. So to summarize, in my view, suicide is a very important aspect of our lives because it rests on the borderline. And I say suicide rather than death because we're talking about life and death, but the difference between life and death, death can be accidental, but suicide is intentional. That is something that is in your own conscious control. So, and I say that because if your own conscious control, if your own conscious decision is either to live or to die, suicide is a very important part of your exploration of your own existence. And I think we need to give it a lot more emphasis and consideration than most of us do. A lot of us try to dismiss it, but we all those who are living have made a decision to live. Like I say, it takes more effort in energy expended to live than it does to commit suicide. That's all for now. I may have more to say about this, and I'd like to hear anybody's considerations about this. I may have stepped on a few people's sensitivities in this aspect of it, and there's something else I would love to say about suicide. Suicide is a very powerful tool. Anyways, talk to you later. Take care.